I woke to the smell of burning metal, and for one impossible heartbeat, I believed I was still dreaming. The world around me glowed red and orange, a trembling sea of fire and shadows, and I couldn't tell where the flames ended, and my mind began. My lungs filled with smoke instead of air, and somewhere beneath the ringing in my ears, I could hear something far more terrifying. Silence. The kind of silence that only exists when everything that mattered has already died. It took me a few seconds to remember I'd been laughing only moments ago, watching the road blur past while someone at the back of the bus sang off-key. Now, that sound was gone, swallowed by heat, broken glass, and the distant echo of sirens that seemed to belong to another world. I tried to move, but the seatbelt had melted against my chest, holding me in a coffin of twisted steel. My fingers trembled as I fought against it, the pain in my body screaming louder than any thought in my head. When it finally tore free, I fell hard onto the shattered floor, my palms sliding through warm blood. I didn't even know if it was mine. The smell was thick and unreal, a mixture of gasoline and burning rubber and something human. Through the smoke, I could see shapes, people who had names, faces, voices, now motionless, trapped in the wreckage. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape me, desperate to run from the truth my eyes refused to accept. Every breath I took felt stolen, borrowed from someone who no longer had any left to give. I stumbled out of the shattered doorway, my clothes half burned, my skin stinging from the heat that still clung to the air. The sky above me was dark and red, as if the night itself had caught fire. I turned around, staring at what was left of the bus, or maybe at what was left of my life. I wanted to go back, to pull them out, to save anyone who might still be breathing, but my legs wouldn't obey. The crash site stretched before me like a graveyard built in seconds. When the rescuers found me, I couldn't even speak. Their words came muffled, distant, as if they were calling from underwater. Hands grabbed my shoulders, checking my pulse, shouting for stretchers. One of them asked my name. I tried to answer, but the sound that came out was only a whisper. I remember one of them saying, "He's alive. We got one." One. The word echoed inside my skull, louder than the sirens, louder than the fire. Only one. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I tilted my head back toward the burning wreck. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I saw movement. Maybe my mind refused to let go. But I swear, in that moment, the smoke parted, and I saw something standing there. A silhouette framed by firelight, motionless, watching me leave. And then, beneath the roar of the flames and the crackle of falling glass, I heard it. A voice. Soft. Familiar. Calling my name from the heart of the inferno. My blood turned cold. I tried to sit up, shouting that someone was still inside, but the rescuers held me down. The ambulance doors closed, cutting off the sound. Yet even as we drove away, that whisper followed me, threading through the sirens and the night, saying words that would haunt me forever. You shouldn't have survived. They called me lucky, but luck doesn't haunt you every night. It doesn't wake you at 3 a.m. with the echo of screams that no longer exist, or make you wonder if you're breathing borrowed air. In the hospital, people smiled when they saw me. Nurses, reporters, even strangers who sent flowers, all calling me a miracle. But I wasn't a miracle. I was the evidence that something went wrong, that fate chose the wrong person to keep. Every time someone said I was blessed, I felt like I was being cursed all over again. I can still hear the hum of the machines in that room, the rhythm of survival, a mechanical heartbeat that reminded me, with every pulse, that I was still here when I shouldn't be. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint trace of smoke clinging to my clothes. No matter how many times they washed me, it wouldn't go away. The fire had become part of me, stitched into my skin, burned into my memories, refusing to let me heal. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, the flash of metal twisting, the sound of glass exploding like 1,000 tiny bullets. The moment the laughter turned to terror. The world ending again and again, each blink dragging me through the wreckage until I woke up gasping, covered in sweat and the taste of ash. The nurses told me it was trauma. They said dreams couldn't hurt me, but they didn't understand that dreams were the only place the others still lived, and that made waking up feel like losing them all over again. Sometimes the doctors came in with gentle smiles and clipboards, saying I was strong, that I would walk again soon. But their words slid past me like smoke. What good were strong legs when they only carried me away from the dead? They said I should be grateful, that I'd been given a second chance. But every second chance feels like a punishment when the first one cost so many lives. The media wanted interviews. The world wanted a story. Reporters hovered outside my room like vultures, waiting to feed on my pain. They wanted tears on camera, a trembling voice, the perfect headline, "Sole Survivor Speaks." I didn't speak. I couldn't. How could I tell them that I didn't feel saved? That sometimes I wished I'd burned too? Days bled into nights without meaning. The cards stopped coming, the reporters moved on, and the nurse's kindness turned into routine. People outside forgot the crash. The world always forgets. But I couldn't. I was still there, trapped in that moment where everything ended. My body was healing, but my mind stayed behind in the flames. One night the rain was hitting the window like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the darkened glass, pale, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. I whispered to myself just to hear another voice. Why me? The question hung in the air, unanswered, echoing back at me like a ghost that refused to leave. Then it happened. The television mounted on the wall, the one I hadn't touched in weeks, flickered to life on its own. The static hiss filled the silence, bright light flashing across the room. My pulse quickened as the blur sharpened into an image I knew too well. Flames, smoke, the twisted skeleton of the bus, my nightmare. The footage zoomed in, the camera shaking violently. I reached for the remote, but my hand froze when I heard it. A faint, distant voice coming from the speakers. My name. Spoken softly. Then the screen went black. In its reflection, something moved behind me. Something that shouldn't have been there. The dead started talking to me, and I listened. It began as a whisper buried inside the hospital silence, faint enough to make me believe it was just my own mind echoing memories I couldn't silence. After that night when the television came alive and showed me the crash, I couldn't trust the quiet anymore. Every hum of the fluorescent lights, every hiss of the oxygen line seemed to carry a voice hidden beneath it. At first, I thought it was the trauma playing tricks on me, but soon the whispers began to say names, familiar ones, and that's when fear turned into something darker. Days after the crash, the authorities returned the personal items recovered from the wreck. A cardboard box waited for me at the foot of my hospital bed, tagged, sealed, impersonal. Inside lay what was left of my old world, a melted wristwatch, a broken phone, a charm bracelet with half its beads missing, and a blood-stained wallet that still smelled faintly of smoke. Each object carried its own memory, fragile and unbearable. I picked up Amara's bracelet, feeling the warmth of her laughter trapped in its cracked glass beads, and suddenly it wasn't just memory. It was presence. That night, as the rain drummed against the window, I placed those items on my bedside table and tried to sleep. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the monitors. I drifted between wakefulness and dream, the sound of the storm blending with something softer. Voices. They weren't random. They were calling to me, weaving through the rhythm of the rain, whispering things I couldn't quite catch. I heard my name again, followed by a sob, then silence so complete it pressed against my chest. I sat up, heart racing, staring at those objects as if they were breathing. In the days that followed, the voices grew clearer. Sometimes they came from nowhere, sometimes from behind me, and once, I swear, from the reflection in the hospital mirror. I began to speak back to them, softly at first, asking questions I never expected answers to. Why me? What do you want from me? My voice sounded small in that white, sterile room, but when the air turned cold and the lights flickered, I realized I wasn't alone. I started recording everything on the hospital's voice recorder app. Each night, I'd place it beside the items and let it run until morning. I thought maybe, if I could hear the whispers again in the daylight, I could prove to myself they weren't real, that my mind was breaking, not the world around me. The nurses thought I was sleeping better. They didn't know I was staying awake, staring at the red light blinking on the recorder, waiting for something to answer me back. One morning, I played one of the recordings while the nurse changed my bandages. For most of it, there was only the hiss of static and the faint beep of hospital machines. Then, in the background, under the sound of my breathing, came something else. A voice. Faint, trembling, not mine. It whispered, "Don't forget us." The nurse didn't hear it, but I did. My whole body went cold. That night I recorded again, this time whispering questions into the dark. And that's when everything changed. When I played back the latest recording, there was more than static. There were voices overlapping, urgent, almost angry, fighting to be heard through the noise. And then, cutting through them all, one clear sentence froze my blood. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a memory. It was a warning. A voice, unmistakably human but not alive, said, "It wasn't an accident." The police closed the case too fast, as if they already knew the ending. The morning after I heard that voice on the recording, I couldn't shake the words echoing through my head. It wasn't an accident. They circled inside my skull like a warning I wasn't meant to ignore. I played that recording a dozen times, each replay cutting deeper, until the static began to sound like breathing, until the whisper felt less like a ghost and more like a command. I told myself it was survivor's guilt, that I was hearing what I wanted to hear, but deep down, I knew better. Something about the crash had never made sense. The timing, the silence of the investigation, the way everyone seemed desperate to move on. The official report came 2 weeks later. A single page, cold, efficient, and final. The words "mechanical brake failure" were printed in bold at the top, followed by a few sentences that read like a eulogy written by someone who hadn't cared to attend the funeral. I read it over and over, waiting for it to feel true. But every time I reached the end, I felt the same tightening in my chest, the same certainty that I was being lied to. The police wouldn't release the black box data. They said it was too damaged to retrieve. The driver's name was barely mentioned. His heroism in trying to steer us to safety reduced to one bland sentence. No one questioned the company. No one pressed for details. And within a month, the story vanished from the news entirely. Just another tragedy in a world too busy to mourn. But I couldn't let it go. Not when I still heard their voices in the dark. I checked myself out of the hospital against the doctor's advice, my body still weak, my leg trembling under every step. The world outside looked the same, but I wasn't. The sun felt too bright, the air too light. The living moved as if nothing had happened, and for the first time, I realized how invisible the dead truly were. I rented a car and drove back to the crash site, the place where time had stopped for everyone but me. The road was quiet when I arrived, lined with wilted flowers and burnt soil. The trees around the bend were blackened, their bark stripped and scarred by fire. I stood there, listening, not to the wind or the birds, but to the silence, heavy, and waiting. The ashes crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the spot where the bus had rolled. I could still see it, the way it had skidded sideways, the scream of tires that hadn't been supposed to fail. I walked the stretch slowly, tracing the tire marks with my eyes, counting the distance, measuring the impossibility of it all. The official report claimed the brakes failed 30 seconds before impact. But here, on this road, I saw two sets of markings, one leading toward the slope, another curving sharply as if someone had tried to correct it. That second line shouldn't have existed. Then, half buried beneath the soil, something caught the light. I knelt and brushed the dirt away with shaking hands until I uncovered it. A charred, jagged piece of metal, still blackened but unnaturally clean along one edge, like it had been cut deliberately. It wasn't part of a bus. It was thicker, heavier, and cold enough to sting my fingers. As I turned it over, the wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic smell, the same one I remembered before the crash. My chest tightened. I realized I was holding a fragment of the lie that killed them. That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. The hairs on my neck rose, and the shadows between the trees deepened. I looked up, my heart pounding, and there it was, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, its outline barely visible through the smoke drifting from the soil. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a hallucination, another ghost conjured by guilt. But then it moved, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably real, before melting back into the woods. I wasn't alone on that road. Someone had followed me there. Someone who didn't want me to know the truth. Truth doesn't knock. It breaks your door at 2 a.m. I learned that the night she came for me. I hadn't slept since visiting the crash site. My mind replayed that shadow in the trees over and over, the way it had moved like it belonged there. I told myself it was a trick of the smoke, a mind warped by trauma, until I heard the first knock. Slow, deliberate. 3 times. When I didn't answer, it came again, harder, the kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission. I opened the door, half expecting the police or another reporter looking for a quote. Instead, she stood there, a woman in a rain-soaked coat, her hair clinging to her face, eyes sharp and haunted, like someone who had been watching the same nightmare play on repeat. She introduced herself as a journalist, voice low, steady, too calm for that hour. "My name's Mara," she said, "and I think what happened to you wasn't an accident." The words hit like thunder. For a moment I just stared at her, trying to read her face, searching for deceit. "I don't want to talk about it," I told her, but she stepped past me, dripping water onto the floor, her gaze scanning the room as if she expected someone else to be listening. "You don't have to," she said. "Just listen." She dropped a folder onto my table, pages covered in names, dates, and documents stamped with company logos I recognized instantly. The transport company that owned the bus, the same company that had issued public condolences and shut down all inquiries a week later. Mara flipped through the files, her fingers trembling slightly. "I've been investigating them for 2 years," she said. "There were other crashes, smaller ones, but the pattern is the same. Maintenance falsified, safety reports buried. Every whistleblower either vanished or suddenly changed their story." My stomach turned. The memory of that burnt metal shard flashed in my mind, the clean cut, the smell of fuel. "You're saying it was deliberate?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes glinting with something between fury and pity. "I'm saying someone made sure that bus never reached its destination." The words pressed against my chest like weight. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that this was just grief searching for meaning, but deep down, I already knew. The official report, the missing evidence, the whisper on the recording, all of it pointed to one truth I didn't want to face. I told her about the voices, about the night the TV played the footage. I expected her to laugh, to leave, but she didn't. She only nodded. "They want to be heard," she said softly. "Maybe they chose you, because you're the only one left." We sat in silence after that, the rain hammering against the windows like the world was trying to drown out what she'd just said. Part of me wanted her to leave, to take the truth with her and disappear. But another part, the part that hadn't slept since the crash, needed answers. When she finally stood to go, she handed me a USB drive. "Everything I've found is on there," she said. "Keep it safe. And whatever happens next, don't trust anyone who tells you to stop asking questions." I watched her walk away into the rain, her silhouette swallowed by darkness, and I realized I'd just stepped onto a path I could never turn back from. Later that night, I woke to the smell of smoke, sharp, bitter, rising from the floorboards. My chest seized as I stumbled to my feet, coughing, the air thick with heat and panic. Flames licked the edges of my living room, crawling across the walls faster than I could think. My hands went straight for the drawer where I'd hidden the USB and the crash evidence, but when I yanked it open, it was empty. Everything gone. Outside, through the flicker of firelight, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing across the street, motionless in the rain, watching. By the time the fire trucks arrived, my home was nothing but ash, and the truth once again had burned with it. If everyone else died that day, maybe I was supposed to as well. The thought burrowed into my head like a splinter I couldn't pull out, festering every time I breathed in the scent of smoke that still clung to my clothes. The fire had taken everything. My notes, the evidence, even the fragments of metal I'd kept hidden. The firefighters called it an accident, faulty wiring. But as I stood watching the ashes of my home scatter into the wind, I knew accidents like that don't happen twice. Someone wanted to erase the truth, and this time they wanted to erase me with it. The first threat came 3 days later. An unmarked envelope slid beneath my hotel door in the middle of the night. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no handwriting, no signature, just the words, "Stop digging, or we'll finish what we started." The letters weren't printed. They were cut out from magazines, the kind of cliché you'd expect in a bad movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, collapsing one message at a time. After that, the phone calls began. At first, they were silent, just breathing, low and steady, as if someone wanted me to know they were there but not ready to speak. I changed hotels. I changed numbers. Still, they found me. The next message wasn't silence. It was a recording, my own voice from one of the hospital tapes, whispering the same words that had haunted me for weeks. It wasn't an accident. Hearing myself say it through an unknown phone shattered something inside me. I went to the police again. They listened politely, took notes, nodded the way people do when they've already decided not to believe you. They said maybe it was a prank. Maybe the fire really was faulty wiring. Maybe I should stop chasing ghosts. But ghosts were all I had left, and they were starting to feel more real than the living. I started carrying a camera with me, filming everything. The streets, the cars parked outside, the faces I thought I saw twice. Paranoia became my shadow. Once, when I went to start my car, the engine coughed, but didn't turn. A mechanic later told me the brake line had been cut clean through. I remember standing there, staring at that severed cable, realizing that someone had expected me to drive that night, to die the way I should have in the crash. That was the moment I understood. Survival wasn't an accident. It was a mistake someone was trying to correct. Then Mara, the journalist, stopped answering her phone. I called her every day, left messages, sent emails that came back unread. Her apartment door was locked, mail piling up outside. No one had seen her in a week. I filed a missing person report, but I could tell by the officer's tone that they didn't care. "People disappear all the time," he said. Not like this, I thought. Not when they're about to expose the truth. I started sleeping with the lights on, afraid of what waited in the dark. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times, but fear has a way of finding cracks you didn't know existed. It crawled under my skin, whispering that I was next. Then one night, my phone buzzed. No number, just a voicemail notification. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Static filled the line, then a voice broke through. Faint, broken, but unmistakable. It was Mara. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Run. They know you lived. And then the line went dead, leaving only silence. The kind I hadn't heard since the crash, the kind that always comes before something terrible happens. If I couldn't remember what happened, I'd recreate it. That thought became an obsession, the only thread keeping me from unraveling completely after Mara's message. Sleep abandoned me again. Every blink replayed her trembling voice. Run. They know you lived. I kept wondering if she was already gone when she said it. If I was listening to a recording sent from somewhere between the living and the dead. But grief has a way of turning into determination. If they had destroyed the proof once, I would rebuild everything they tried to burn. The first thing I did was trace every scrap of data I could find. Local news archives, witness statements, blurry cell phone videos filmed from passing cars that had stopped when they saw the flames. I bought a used laptop, a cheap drone, and rented a room above a mechanic's shop, a place that smelled of oil and old metal. It became my war room. Night after night, I pieced together fragments like bones from a graveyard. Each clip, each photo, each timeline entry formed the skeleton of the truth I had refused to let die. I flew the drone over the crash site at dawn, the mist still clinging to the valley where the bus had plunged. From above, it looked peaceful, quiet, and green, but I could still feel the weight of that morning buried beneath the soil. I mapped the tire marks I had seen before, marking every scrape and scorch on the asphalt. When I aligned them with the photographs from the police report, they didn't match. Their diagram showed a clean, single-line trajectory. Mine showed chaos. 2 breaking points, one near the curve, one far earlier, exactly where the driver would have realized something was wrong. I dug deeper. Maintenance logs, hidden on archived servers, showed that the bus had passed inspection 3 days before the crash. Yet the signatures were forged, identical to another record from a different vehicle months earlier. Someone had copied them, someone who never expected anyone to look that close. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. The brakes hadn't failed, they'd been tampered with. The discovery shook me more than any nightmare had. I remembered the driver's last glance in the mirror before the world flipped. Calm, steady, brave. He must have known. He tried to save us anyway. That realization hollowed me out. He had died trying to protect lives that someone else had decided were expendable. I went back to the crash site once more, standing on the patch of earth where I had crawled out alive. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint smell of burned rubber, or maybe it was just memory pretending to breathe again. I knelt and pressed my palm against the soil. "I'm still here," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to them or to myself. For the first time since the accident, tears came without warning. Not of guilt this time, but of rage. Rage that their deaths had been turned into paperwork and lies. I spent days cross-referencing employee lists, comparing signatures from maintenance logs, internal memos, payment receipts. One name kept repeating, tucked quietly at the bottom of every document. Initials that meant nothing until I followed them through the company's hierarchy. Each click brought me closer to something I didn't want to see. At the top of the chain, beneath the glossy company logo and public safety pledges, the signature reappeared. Bold, confident, the same handwriting that had approved every inspection, every falsified report. The name belonged to the CEO himself, the man who had stood before cameras, tears shining in his eyes, calling me our brave survivor. And in that moment, staring at his name glowing on my laptop screen, I understood that the man who had comforted me at the memorial was the same one who had built the road to our deaths. Every night, I hear the crash again, only now I see faces. They don't scream anymore. They just look at me, eyes wide, waiting for something I still can't give them. I used to wake up gasping, believing it was guilt dragging me back into the fire. But now I know better. It isn't guilt. It's them, the dead. They're not haunting me. They're showing me the truth I wasn't supposed to find. After discovering the CEO's name buried in those files, sleep became a war I couldn't win. The more I tried to rest, the louder they became. The sound of engines grinding, metal twisting, voices calling my name through the darkness. Sometimes I'd see the driver in my dreams, still gripping the wheel, his eyes meeting mine through the rearview mirror. He never spoke, but every time I saw him, he pointed somewhere behind me, to the place where the wreck had happened. It was like he was trying to lead me to something, or someone. One evening, I followed that feeling. The company's old garage had been shut down months ago, sealed under a restructuring order. But I found my way in through a broken service gate. The air smelled of rust and forgotten oil. Rows of abandoned buses stood like tombstones, their windows black with dust. I walked between them with a flashlight, my breath fogging in the cold air, until I found the one. The number stenciled near the door matched the one from our crash report. Bus 47. The driver's seat was still there, melted and warped, but something glinted beneath the dashboard. I reached in and pulled it out, a small scorched dash cam, the kind used for insurance recording. My heart almost stopped. I didn't know if it would still work, but I took it home, hands trembling the entire drive. That night, I cleaned it carefully, brushing away layers of ash and grime until the faint company logo appeared on the back. The memory card was still inside, half melted, but intact. I plugged it into my laptop and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened, just static and corrupted fragments of light. Then, suddenly, the screen came alive. The recording showed the road from the driver's point of view. Bright morning, steady hands on the wheel, passengers chatting faintly in the background. It played normally for a few seconds, and then the tone shifted. The bus shook. The driver leaned forward, slamming the brakes. Nothing. The pedal didn't respond. He shouted something I couldn't hear over the rising roar, and then, just before the frame blurred into chaos, the sound cut through clearly. His voice, desperate and furious. "They cut the brakes!" I froze. The words burned into my skull. This was it, the proof. The voice of a man who had died trying to save us, captured seconds before everything turned to fire. I played it again and again, each replay twisting the knife deeper. My hands shook as I copied the footage to an external drive. I knew I had to protect it. This was more than evidence. It was the voice of the dead demanding justice. For the first time since the crash, I felt something like purpose. Not peace, never peace, but clarity. The whispers that had haunted me now had meaning. They hadn't been trying to scare me. They'd been guiding me to this. I fell asleep that night with the dash cam resting beside my bed, the screen still faintly glowing as if alive. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Too bright, too calm. I turned toward the table. The dash cam was gone. The drive, the files, every trace, vanished. My door was still locked from the inside. And on the window, written in a smear of soot no wind could have made, were 3 words that froze my blood. "We warned you. Justice is expensive, and the price was my peace." The morning the dashcam disappeared, I realized I was no longer searching for the truth. I was running from it. The message on the window, "We warned you," wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Every instinct in me screamed to stop, to let it go, to disappear before they made good on their word. But every time I thought of the people who died, of the driver's voice shouting, "They cut the brakes," I knew there was no peace left for me in silence. I left the apartment that same day, taking only what I could fit in a backpack, a burner phone, the few digital backups I had managed to save, and the gnawing feeling that someone was already watching me. I took the long way everywhere, changed motels every night, used fake names, paid in cash. But paranoia doesn't care about logic. It follows you like a shadow that breathes. In every dark reflection, I saw the outline of the figure who had watched me at the crash site. Through one of Mara's old contacts, I found a man willing to talk, a whistleblower who had once worked maintenance for the same company. He wouldn't meet in person, only online through encrypted calls, his voice distorted and cautious. He said he'd seen the falsified inspection logs, the forged signatures, the hidden payments to keep regulators silent. "They've done this before," he told me, his voice trembling. The breaks weren't the first thing they cut. When I asked him who ordered it, he went quiet for a long time before saying, "You already know the name." That silence after those words was heavier than any threat I'd received. I could hear him breathing, fast, panicked, as if someone was already at his door. "Be careful," he whispered. "They don't leave survivors." The call ended abruptly. I tried to reach him again the next day. The number was disconnected. It became clear that this wasn't just a cover-up. It was an operation, carefully protected by people with power, money, and the reach to make anyone disappear. I started sending everything I had: the crash data, the recovered files, screenshots, copies of every document, to an anonymous journalist network. I didn't know if they'd believe me, but I had to make sure the truth lived somewhere beyond my hands. Days blurred into nights. I barely ate, barely slept. Every knock, every sound in the hallway felt like a countdown. I watched news clips of the CEO speaking at charity events, smiling for cameras, shaking hands with politicians, the same hands that had signed the death certificates of 54 people, and called it bad luck. My anger burned cold, no longer frantic but focused, like a slow fire that would never go out. But isolation has a way of unspooling the mind. The whispers returned, not from ghosts this time, but from the corners of my own exhaustion. I started questioning everything. Maybe the whistleblower was never real. Maybe Mara was gone because she'd realized I was wrong. Maybe the world had moved on, and I was the only one still trapped in the wreck. My reflection looked thinner every day, my eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and obsession. One night, I sat in the dark with the laptop open, cursor blinking over the last message I'd typed to the anonymous contact. I wrote, "If anything happens to me, tell them it wasn't an accident." Then I hit send and closed it forever. The next morning, I went to buy a newspaper, the first I'd dared to touch in weeks. My hands trembled as I unfolded the front page, expecting nothing, maybe another headline about politics or storms. But there it was, a photo of me, taken months ago, printed in black and white. The headline above it read, "The survivor of the 54 death crash is missing." And below it, in smaller print, a question that felt like a verdict. Was he ever really alive? If you're watching this, it means they found me. I didn't plan on dying like this, not hunted, not silenced. But I knew from the start that survival came with a price, and I've been paying it every day since that crash. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what they did, and how many had to die, so a few men in suits could stay rich and untouchable. This isn't a suicide note. It's a confession, not because I'm guilty, but because I'm tired of being the only one left to tell the truth. I set up the camera on a stack of old books in the corner of another rented room, its walls bare, its windows covered with newspaper to block out the world. The red light blinked on, steady, patient, watching me like an unblinking eye. My hands shook as I hit record. For the first few seconds I couldn't speak, just sat there listening to the sound of my own heartbeat in the microphone. Then I began. I told everything. The crash, the investigation that wasn't one, the whistleblower, Mara, the forged logs, the CEO's signature approving the sabotage. I named every name I'd found, every account that had been paid off, every lie buried beneath corporate condolences. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. I gave dates, documents, faces, a roadmap for anyone brave enough to follow it after I was gone. The camera lens became my witness, the only one I could trust anymore. As I spoke, the paranoia began to creep back, the familiar hum of something watching, waiting. The motel lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. My breath fogged in the air, though the room wasn't cold. Somewhere outside, a car engine idled too long before driving away. I reminded myself that fear was just proof I was still alive. I looked into the lens and spoke to them, to the ones I'd lost. "You didn't die for nothing," I said. "I swear you didn't." My throat tightened as I said their names. Everyone I could remember. Every face I'd seen in dreams. "If anyone ever sees this," I whispered, "don't forget them. Don't let them be numbers in a report." For a moment the camera blurred, as if the air itself trembled. Maybe it was just the light. Maybe not. I uploaded the files as I recorded, one by one, sending them to multiple servers. Anonymous, hidden, impossible to trace. Each progress bar crawled forward like a lifeline. I knew once it was done, it would no longer matter what happened to me. The truth would exist, free and unstoppable. Halfway through the upload, I paused. My reflection in the dark lens didn't look like me anymore. Pale, hollow-eyed, more ghost than man. I wondered if this was what the driver had felt, those last seconds before the crash. The strange calm of knowing your death might mean something to someone. "If you're watching this," I said again, "don't look for me. Just make sure they can't bury this too." That's when I heard it. A sound from the hallway. Soft at first, like fabric brushing against wood. Then heavier. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Getting closer. My voice faltered, but I forced myself to keep speaking. "They think they can erase me," I whispered. "But they can't erase what's already been seen." The doorknob rattled once. The light above me flickered again, longer this time, casting shadows that crawled across the walls. There was a loud bang, not like a gun, not like thunder, but something in between. The camera jolted, toppling sideways, the image spinning into chaos. For a second, I saw the door swing open, a blur of black boots, the flash of a gloved hand, and then everything drowned in static. The red recording light kept blinking, alone in the dark, long after the room fell silent. They tried to erase me, but ghosts don't die twice. When the static ended, the world began to hear what they were never meant to hear. My final recording, the one I thought would vanish with me, surfaced online 2 days later. No one knew who uploaded it. No one claimed responsibility. But within hours, it spread like fire through every screen it touched. The words I'd whispered into that lonely camera, the names, the documents, the voice of the driver shouting, "They cut the brakes," became headlines, hashtags, movements. For the first time since the crash, the silence broke, and the dead finally spoke through me. At first, I didn't believe it was real. I saw it on a stranger's phone in a diner miles from where I'd last been seen. My face pixelated, my voice shaking, the red light blinking in the corner. The caption read, "The Survivor Speaks." Within hours, it was everywhere, reposted, analyzed, dissected. Some called it conspiracy, others called it courage. But to the families who had buried empty coffins, it was a resurrection. The truth had claws, and it dug its way out of every lie they'd buried it under. Protests erupted in the streets, candles and posters, chants demanding justice. The company's pristine logo became a symbol of corruption. Reporters camped outside government buildings, shouting questions no one could dodge anymore. Investigators reopened the case, this time under public pressure too strong to silence. The CEO, the board members, the safety officers who had signed the forged reports, one by one their names appeared beside the word "arrested." I watched all of it from a distance, hidden behind anonymity and exhaustion. Every headline should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Watching justice unfold didn't fill the emptiness left behind. It only reminded me that I was still alive when they weren't. The world was finally listening, but the voices that mattered most had gone quiet again. People started calling me a hero. They printed my picture on banners, painted murals of my face surrounded by flames that turned into light. But heroes sleep at night. Heroes heal. I didn't. I wandered from town to town, always half expecting the same black car to appear in my rearview mirror, always half hoping it would. I gave interviews under fake names, sent new documents to journalists from untraceable addresses, watched the story evolve until it no longer belonged to me. In quiet moments, I rewatched fragments of the recording that had started it all. The camera shaking, my voice cracking, the moment I said, "If you're watching this, it means they found me." People said that line gave them chills, but to me, it was a prophecy that never stopped echoing. I had spent so long running from death that I no longer knew what living felt like. The families of the victims created a foundation in their memory. They wrote to me, thanking me, forgiving me. I never wrote back. I didn't know how to tell them that forgiveness felt heavier than guilt. I would stand outside their memorials sometimes, unseen in the crowd, listening to their prayers. In those moments, I could almost feel the warmth of the ones I'd lost, not haunting me anymore, just watching. Months later, just when the world began to move on, another video appeared online. No title, no description, grainy footage, filmed from far away. It showed a man walking along a deserted road at dusk, clothes torn, face obscured, body thin, but unmistakable. The location matched the site of the crash. The man stopped, turned slightly toward the camera, and for a moment, the light caught his eyes. It was me, alive, silent, walking away from the ashes, as if death had never found me at all. Survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the haunting. I learned that the hard way. Years passed after the truth came out, after the arrests, the protests, and the headlines faded into history. The world had moved on, but I hadn't. The footage of me walking away from the crash site surfaced like a ghost, reminding everyone that I still existed. But to me, it felt like proof that maybe I shouldn't have. Every step I took since that day had been borrowed, every breath an echo of the ones they no longer had, and now, all I could do was try to make those borrowed moments mean something. I returned to the crash memorial on an overcast morning, years after the world had stopped caring. The air was still, heavy with the weight of unspoken prayers. The names of the dead were carved into stone, 54 in total, each one a universe that ended in fire. Flowers lay faded at their feet, petals curling into ash, yet the place still felt alive, humming softly, as if their voices lingered between the trees. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, my reflection trembling in the polished black granite. From my pocket, I pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and damp from being read too many times. On it, in handwriting I could barely recognize anymore, were 5 words: "Forgive me for living." I placed it at the base of the memorial, beneath the name of the driver who had tried to save us all. My fingers lingered on the cold stone as I whispered, "You were right. They cut the brakes." It wasn't just a confession. It was a promise kept too late. After the truth went public, I built something. Not a monument to guilt, but a foundation for safety reforms, the kind of work that would make sure no one else had to live through what we did. I poured everything into it: time, money, grief. It grew beyond me, led by people who believed that remembrance was a kind of justice. Schools adopted road safety programs, bus companies changed their systems, and survivors from other tragedies began to reach out. They called it healing. I called it penance. But at night, when the world went quiet, the crash still came back to me. Not as horror anymore, but as memory. Faces in the dark, voices in the flames. Only now they didn't accuse me. They walked beside me. Sometimes I'd see them in crowds, fleeting shapes that vanished when I blinked, or hear laughter that faded into the wind. It wasn't madness, it was mercy. The dead had stopped haunting me and started guiding me instead. Standing before the memorial, I felt that same presence, a warmth behind the cold, the kind that says you're not alone anymore. For the first time in years, I smiled, a real one, the kind that comes after tears have run dry. I knew then that survival wasn't meant to break me. It was meant to carry their stories, to keep them alive in the only way the living can, by remembering. As I turned to leave, the clouds broke, and sunlight spilled through, bathing the names in gold. The air shifted, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke, but this time it didn't frighten me. It felt like home. I looked back one last time, and for a moment I could almost see them, standing there unburned, unbroken, smiling. Then I heard it. A child's voice, soft and familiar, carried gently on the wind. "Thank you for saving us," it whispered. I froze, tears rising before I could stop them. The air grew still again, the world falling silent around me. I closed my eyes, let the warmth wash over me, and for the first time since the crash, I felt peace, not because I survived, but because I finally understood why, if this story touched something deep inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Share it, so their voices live on. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were the one who survived. Your support keeps these true-to-life stories alive, so hit that subscribe button and join me for the next journey. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be remembered.